The entirety of Season 2 of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic will be reviewed in this video. Inspiration, watch the whole thing, blah blah blah, YouTube algorithm. Episodes 27 and 28, The Return of Harmony. Discord returns to wreak havoc in Equestria, and the men 6 are tasked with stopping him. The Season 2 opener is a lot of fun to watch, and it's here we really see what the animators can do with a little creativity. Well, no, a lot of creativity. This has to be one of the most imaginative specials we've seen as far as animation is concerned. Everything from Discord ranges from being just super bizarre to really funny. And that's not even getting into the character himself. Discord is a delight as a villain, and if I may also add, way more interesting than Nightmare Moon ever was. He really makes this opener what it is, and I love every moment he's on screen. Some of my favorite moments have to do with what he did with those rabbits that Fluttershy likes to look after. Like, Andrew gets some really long legs and starts running around stampeding stuff like a camel. And I especially like the part where he ends up running over Twilight Sparkle when she's making her way back to the library, and it gives us some really fun quotes. I had a lot of difficulty trying to figure out which quote to use just because there are so many good ones. Like between Pinkie Pie trying to decide between Harmony and Equestria and Chocolate Milk Rain, or the line from Fluttershy where she's like, "Mama's so proud." I also just like how the story itself plays out. Like, you can just see these subtle little details that show that Twilight's getting slowly but surely more agitated being around her friends. Or, well, what they become. Applejack's honesty becomes deceitfulness, Pinkie Pie's laughter becomes irritability, Rarity's generosity becomes greed, Fluttershy's kindness becomes cruelty, and Rainbow Dash's loyalty becomes treachery. And seeing her transition from being this vivid purple to this absolutely gloomy gray just like everybody else is just so, well, sad. But sad in a good way, like not sad in the way where you want to cry yourself, but just sad to see that she no longer really feels the love that she had for them before. I guess if I had any complaints, I wish I could have seen how Fluttershy was actually corrupted without seeing her just be like booped on the head and just suddenly like, bam, you're cruel. Like, I don't know what I would have done, but I guess this may be foreshadowing towards something, but just thinking about it. Like, what if Discord tried doing more than just planting insecurity in Fluttershy's head? He tripped Pinkie Pie in some mud, what else could he have done to Fluttershy then? Maybe say put her in a situation where she has to stand up for herself because her friends are not around to help her, and then she starts to think she has to be this tough girl because no one else will be tough for her. I don't know, but I mean something else would have been better than what we got there. Don't get me wrong, what they did here was funny, and besides, I highly doubt that they could really use the idea that I just came up with anyway. This is a show for little girls primarily after all. But you know, it just makes you wonder what they could have done if they didn't want to go that route. Something else is, I wish we saw more flashbacks than Applejack's when it came to restoring who they actually were. That was a pretty cool touch. After all, you've got 44 minutes, so you should have plenty of time, and regular show could do it in 22. So why not this one? Instead of just pants to the main 6 being restored and then up to the next one. Not a strike against this episode, but it would have been really cool for character development, but instead we just got to see Applejack learn better what honesty really was. For what it's worth, this is definitely a good two-parter and a good episode, and I really hope that future specials can be as good as this one, if not better. Episode 29, Lesson 0. Twilight desperately seeks for something to write a letter about to Princess Celestia before it's too late. This episode is extremely important for 2 reasons. For starters, it makes the format less rigid as Twilight no longer has to appear in every episode to deliver a lesson about friendship. And 2, we're going to be seeing a lot more characters in the limelight other than Twilight. And while those are very important and drastic changes that only benefit the show going forward, this episode would have been good even without factoring that in. To date, this has to be the absolute best showing we've ever had of both Twilight and Spike. Twilight on her own is just hilarious, especially seeing how she bounces off her friends in this episode. Just the animation you see on her face, the inflections in her voice, it really looks like they were having a lot of fun animating Twilight and voicing her in this episode. And her dilemma is just very relatable. Like, I cannot tell you how many times when I was a kid, I was stressed out over just every little detail, and it's like no one else seems to understand how I really feel about something. So this lesson really hits close to home for me. You know, it doesn't hurt to at least consider how others may be feeling at that very moment, even if it feels small to you. But that's just on her side. On Spike's side, oh my goodness. This has to be the absolute best showing we've ever had of Spike to date. Seriously, this is the Spike I know and love. He's supportive of Twilight, but not enabling her to be insane. Repeatedly, he's trying to bring Twilight back down to Earth and to have her stop worrying so much because he sees that this is really taking its toll on her. And it gets to the point where he has to write to Princess Celestia to finally get Twilight to calm down. Not to mention, he gets his own share of funny moments. The fourth wall gag, the cupcake scene, the ending where he's talking about how cool he is compared to everybody else because he took it seriously how Twilight was feeling. Spike is an absolute gem here, and he really is about as polished as one given how his character was handled. Twilight's friends also get get some funny moments. My favorite just has to be Fluttershy when she was giving that massage to that bear, and it looks like she actually snapped his neck and made Twilight backpedal in fear. That was so funny my first time watching this episode, just seeing Twilight's reaction to what just happened. I couldn't stop laughing at it. But yeah, all around, this episode was fantastic. And I really don't see any glaring flaws here either. If the future episodes end up being this good, this will be a fantastic season overall. Episode 30, Luna Eclipsed. During Nightmare Night, Princess Luna scares her subjects despite wanting to be loved by them. And so we arrive at the very first episode featuring Princess Luna in a prominent fashion, aside from Nightmare Moon and Friendship is Magic Part 2. And well, worst case scenario, it's interesting how they chose to do it on a holiday that basically demonizes Princess Celestia's sister. Yeah, needless to say, I find the concept pretty dang strange for that reason alone. Luna even considers it insulting that the ponies would actually celebrate a holiday like this, so I have to wonder why Celestia did not do anything about it. That aside, I found this episode enjoyable enough. The ponies trying to figure out Twilight's costume for Nightmare Night was pretty funny, especially Pinkie Pie calling her a weirdo clown. And that's another thing, I really like Pinkie Pie in this episode. A big part of that is just because, well, she's genuinely really funny here. And she also functions to keep the plot rolling by having everyone panic in fear every time they see Nightmare Moon, I mean Princess Luna, as well as being the pony to solve the problem by offering the solution to it all. I am also just not that bothered by how Luna and the Nightmare Nighters really interact with each other. And for two big reasons. One, Princess Luna is very clearly out of touch with her pony society, something that she even chalks up to the fact that she's been trapped in the moon for 1,000 years. And two, this is the first appearance of Princess Luna after she's been reformed. So I can't excuse the Nightmare Mooners here because it's just very likely that they're not used to having Princess Luna around. This episode also just has some really cool animation, especially with Zecora. The powder she uses to illustrate Nightmare Night to all these kids, it's actually really cool. Luna's debut is also just really flashy. That all being said, I do have more problems with this episode than just the concept. For example, I can understand why Fluttershy is terrified of Nightmare Moon or Princess Luna because, well, she hates Nightmare Night. I don't blame her, I do too. But why Applejack? I get that Princess Luna's like twice her size, so she would be easily startled by her. But then when Twilight's trying to explain to Applejack that all she wants to do is fit in, she's like, are you serious? And then as Twilight look at her all funny, it's like, Applejack is pretty level-headed. I'm surprised that she wouldn't think that Princess Luna would just want to fit in. Though I'll be honest, when it came down to Fluttershy's scene, this is probably my least favorite part of the episode. I didn't find it very funny, and Fluttershy herself offers nothing but just adding more fear-mongering to the crowd. If anything, that was all Twilight's doing in getting Luna to quiet her voice more. By the way, is it just me, or does anyone else get uncomfortable seeing ponies get levitated using magic? That just seems very abusable. The moral itself also just doesn't really sit very well with me. Not because it's a bad moral, I mean, after all, you don't really know the person on the inside until you talk to them from the outside first. But it feels very similar to a moral that could have been learned in Bridal Gossip. If the moral was more about trying to find your own way of fitting in, even if it's not exactly like being everybody else, or something along those lines, I think it could have worked a lot better here. All in all, despite being Nightmare Night, this is just an okay episode. By the way, where the heck is Rarity? Episode 31, Sisterhooves Social. A feud between Sweetie Belle and Rarity prompts them to split apart from each other. I really like this episode. Rarity on her own already has a pretty well established personality, but this episode delves into the dynamic of her with her little sister, and it's really heartwarming. I have to give the writer a lot of credit for also portraying siblings so realistically too. Yeah, they're bound to have disagreements and fighting quite a bit, but they still love each other deep down. And speaking for myself, I cannot think of a much better way that Rarity could demonstrate that fact than what she did at the end of the episode. This is the same pony that won't even be in the same room as Mud unless it's imported. The same pony that detests anything that could possibly sully her appearance. And she raised the Sisterhooves Social with Sweetie Belle while dripping in mud the entire time just to make Sweetie Belle happy. Sweetie Belle's reaction to this is the same reaction that I had. I actually started crying there because I just did not believe that Rarity would do something so selfless for her little sister like that. And it's not out of character for her to do it either. It's just very clear that she loves her little sister just that much. The build up to this moment is also just really good too. I love the scenes where Sweetie Belle is seeing Apple Bloom and Applejack interact with each other, doing chores, camping out, practicing for the race. Even though, to be honest, it's a bit bittersweet because, you know, Sweetie Belle just wishes that she could have this relationship with Rarity. But then it also alternates between that and Rarity slowly realizing how much she screwed up. And slowly but surely, you just see more and more guilt pile up on Rarity's face as she's slowly but surely realizing just how much Sweetie Belle really meant to her, but also just how much she meant to Sweetie Belle. And before the two split up, you can honestly see both ways on how they feel towards each other. As a big brother myself, I can totally get behind not wanting your stuff being touched. To say nothing of how easy it is to lose your temper over your little siblings making stuff worse for you. And I have to say, Rarity has some incredible self-control at the last shout at Sweetie Belle. If I was in their situation, I would not be able to handle that. But also, even though this is not necessarily a one-for-one comparison, as a little cousin, I have definitely had my times where I wanted to hang out with my cousins more too. And yeah, I was also really prone to screwing out stuff for them. So yeah, this episode hits me especially hard. This episode also has a fair bit of good humor in it too, like when Apple Bloom is asking what it means to be uncouth and then she burps and Applejack is like, exactly! That was hilarious. Sweetie Belle is also just a straight up savage towards Rarity near the end of this episode. And yeah, when you just got through fighting and your older sibling just wants to do stuff that she wants to do, or he wants to do, I wouldn't know I'm the firstborn, I'd be pretty miffed too. Though I wonder if anyone here really knows that you can have two sisters. I mean, just ask Babe Macintosh, he would know. But yeah, the start was a little rocky, but it did a great job establishing the conflict for this episode, and the ending is absolutely beautiful. It's not only a good episode, it's one of the best episodes the show has had so far. And if I may also add, it holds a candle at the suited for success. It's that good. Episode 32, The Cutie Pox. Apple Bloom is forced to act out her cutie marks after she forces one to appear. When I think of this episode, I draw a very quick comparison to the Showstoppers. An episode that was predictable, nonsensical, and had a pretty bad ending. But this episode I don't think is nearly as bad. To be honest, the biggest problem with this episode is just that it has so much filler in it. But even then, the filler in this episode is kinda necessary for it to function. And to be fair, it's not the most boring filler in the world. There were some funny moments like with Apple Bloom's hula hoop, and it gave us that quote with some conventions of SpongeBob reference. And admittedly, there was some pretty creative imagery too, like when Apple Bloom was in town using her hula hoop to cut some pie. And admittedly, I kinda laughed a bit at seeing Spike get the hots for Twilight after the hula hoop hit her mane. But altogether, it's just not enough to save this episode from being an okay episode and nothing more. You know what I find weird? This episode starts with the CMC bowling, and Apple Bloom has to pick up the bowling ball in her mouth just to spit him at the pins. Why didn't that chip her tooth? I also thought that Zecora was oddly irresponsible in this episode. Like, you know that Apple Bloom is desperate for a cutie mark, and you introduce to her a flower that's supposed to grant her heart's desire, and then you just leave to get some more ingredients for that potion, and Apple Bloom of course takes advantage of it because, well, she's a child. Now I get that the plot had to start somehow, but there'd have to be a better way to do that than making Zecora look so naive. Like, what if, say, Apple Bloom offered to help Zecora make the potion for that rooster? Zecora asks Apple Bloom to go get some more amethyst for her. She pretends to venture off for a bit to find the amethyst, can't find it, comes back to Zecora, and then offers to keep watch while Zecora goes out to find the amethyst herself. I mean, she would still look naive, but at least it'd be a lot more realistic as to why she would make that mistake. She actually trusts Apple Bloom. And this could potentially help the filler problem a lot, too. As is, though, this episode is pretty mediocre without much to talk about. And I agree with Diamond Tiara. Having a hula hoop as a cutie mark is freaking lame. Episode 33, May the Best Pet Win. Rainbow Dash wants a pet. You know what's weird about this episode? I actually like it. And I say that's weird because this episode has a lot of problems with it. There are some problems that are debatable, like say Rainbow Dash's friends having pet playlists without her, and I guess assuming that she just would not want to hang out with her friends. But to be fair, that would just be really awkward to not have a pet and everybody else does have one. And I imagine that nobody wants to put Rainbow Dash on the spot either. To be honest, my absolute biggest problem in this episode has to be Fluttershy. I haven't used this critique since Look Before You Sleep, but she looks ridiculously out of character here. Quite possibly the absolute most protective of all of her animals in the entire show, and yet she has absolutely no qualms of Rainbow Dash putting her pets in imminent danger. Not to mention that Rainbow Dash in this episode has been demonstrated to be ridiculously harsh. You'd think she would do more to keep Rainbow Dash in line, but instead, she's not only enabling Rainbow Dash to act like this, but she's actively supporting it. And it's not just her, but her friends too, including Applejack and Twilight, who do think that Rainbow Dash doesn't quite know what being a pet owner really means. Say what you want about Storm of the Century, but at least Pinkie Pie was lectured by both Rainbow Dash and Applejack for being weird. Rainbow Dash gets absolutely no flack for this. Also, Fluttershy, why are you letting a tortoise complete when Rainbow Dash specifically said she wanted a flying pet? In addition to this blatantly disregarding Rainbow Dash's criteria for a pet, it also makes this episode ridiculously predictable. And unfortunately, less so like the Cutie Pox and more so like the Showstoppers. Here's a big question, why would any of these pets want to be Rainbow Dash's pet? You'd think that partway through this episode they would choose to drop out one by one because they decided that she would just not be worth it. Are they just that desperate that their standards are just set so low? I guess so. Why else would they fly through ghastly gorge and risk their literal lives just to be some pony's pet? Yeah, there are a lot of issues with this episode, and I guess predictably enough, this is also our first Nightmare episode! That being said, why do I like this episode? Well, I'll be honest, I found this episode really funny. I loved the dream sequence at the beginning. It was actually really fun to see Rainbow Dash be tripping out in her dream and then waking up on that tree branch. So very quickly, this episode gained my attention. Also, as cruel as Rainbow Dash has been in this episode towards these pets, I really did enjoy seeing these pets compete. The events themselves were a lot of fun to watch, and seeing also how they can perform was awesome. And that bit about Ghastly Gorge, it had Rise of the Valkyries playing in the background. I love that song so freaking much, it never gets old. And the action of actually flying through the gorge was still super gripping for me. Yeah, this is a bad episode, by absolutely no stretch of the imagination, but I had a lot of fun watching it. So yeah, this is my very first guilty pleasure of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Episode 34, The Mysterious Mare Duel! Rainbow Dash is bragging spawns a mysterious hero that she wants to surpass. And so we arrive at quite possibly the most maligned episode of the whole show. This is an episode I hear lots of people hate to watch. And it's for this reason I am almost certain that my opinion will become extremely unpopular from this point forward. Yeah, here's the newsflash. I actually really like this episode. A lot, in fact. Rainbow Dash prior to this episode has already been demonstrated to be very, very conceited, and so it doesn't really feel unnatural to see her get so high and mighty to herself. Like, to the point where she's skywriting her own cutie mark in the clouds, while also trying to use an infant not crying as a reason to have more ponies cheer for her. This episode goes to great lengths to really show that Rainbow Dash is going too far, even insinuating the idea that she's the only hero that Ponyville needs, despite the fact that the main six as a whole are heroes. And it's heavily implied that this has been going on for days, so yeah, even Pinkie Pie is getting irritable here. Admittedly, I wish we could have seen someone like maybe Fluttershy or Twilight Sparkle try to talk to Rainbow Dash before this moment, but they got the point across pretty dang well in my opinion. I mean, yeah, Rainbow Dash was outwardly saving lives, but she was very clearly getting out of hand. And you can see that in the very next scene also, where Snips is trying to tell Rainbow Dash about a pony and a hot air balloon, and she's delaying rescuing her to sign an autograph. Imagine if she did that to Rarity and Sonic Rainboom. Enter Mare Duel, and I find the way she's introduced to be very clever. She saves the pony and ventures off into the sunset, but then the mayor comes in, giving this Mare Duel some intrigue and even giving her a name. The mayor is also holding a parade near the end of the episode to give Rainbow Dash a chance to confront her and then have her amassed once and for all as the main six. All to teach Rainbow Dash a moral about doing the right thing for the right reasons. A moral that I absolutely adore. Not only is this a moral that Rainbow Dash really needed to learn, but it's also an extremely topical moral in today's society too. How often do you hear about people doing stuff that's good in nature but only for clout? That's Rainbow Dash in this episode. And I love this because it's also the first sign of the main six really working together as a team. And their strengths are on full display. Twilight's magic is out of this world, so she would definitely be well equipped to deal with the dam. Pinkie Pie's Pinkie Sense actually has a purpose here, dodging falling debris in a construction site and getting every pony to safety. Applejack has also been demonstrated to be ridiculously strong on her hind legs. And even Rarity's costume for Mare Duel was very clever in how minimalistic it was, to really show that she was a very humble pony. I'm just a little bit iffy over Fluttershy's little flyby though, but I guess it's also to establish that Rainbow Dash is not the only Pegasus in the main six. And yeah, Fluttershy is the element of kindness, but there's a thing called tough love, everyone. This then leads to Rainbow Dash making a fool of herself by trying to find itty bitty little things to really make a mountain out of. And I'll be honest, I found this funny. Like, really, Rainbow? You're trying to open a jar of peanut butter? Mowing the lawn? What are you, Paperboy? I guess she just forgot that there can't be more than one hero in Ponyville. Take it from me, a YouTuber, you're much better off trying to work together with other people other than trying to fight against them to basically be a better hero. All that matters is that ponies are safe. Also, you have to appreciate the fact that both Twilight and Applejack are in the audience for Mare Duel's parade, but are then later on revealed to also be Mare Duel as Pinkie Pie is caught. And Fluttershy is nowhere to be seen, and let's be real here. If there's any pony that can outmaneuver Rainbow Dash, it's Pinkie Pie. So yeah, I have no shame in admitting this, I think this is a good episode. And might I add, the most underrated episode in Season 2. Episode 35, Sweet and Elite. Rarity's heart is split between Twilight's birthday party and being seen as an important pony in Canterlot. I have very mixed feelings on this episode. More than anything else, it feels like Rarity just wants to be seen as important in Canterlot. But the weird thing is, if she knows Princess Celestia, wouldn't that on its own already make you really important? And if not that, how about the fact that you helped save the world not once, but twice? It seems to me at least that Rarity has plenty to be famous over already. And for some reason, not only is she not, but she's also ashamed to bring up her friends at all up until the end of the episode. I mean, I know why, that Turnip's pony made a really bad first impression for her. so it does make some sense that Rarity would get some really hardcore tunnel vision. But in the grand scheme of things, it makes Rarity look really ungrateful to Twilight, who, naive as she may be, is extremely kind in this episode. Especially towards Rarity. Like, she cares about Rarity so much that she's leaving behind Ponyville with her friends to go and meet Rarity so that she can be included on her birthday party. And that's on top of gifting her a suite so she can stay in Canterlot in luxury. When you really think about the external circumstances, this conflict feels a lot weaker than it really should be. And also, thanks to a future episode, i.e. Dragon Quest, it's also become extremely clear to me that Spike's not in this episode, which has become jarring for two reasons. One, you'd think that Spike would be the absolute most eager to see Rarity in Canterlot, right? The dude has a crush on her. And two, this also means that Spike is missing out on Twilight's birthday party, which in retrospect is actually really sad. However, there's one critical thing in this episode that really saves it from being a nightmare episode for me, and that's Rarity's guilt. Even with everything that I said in this episode also knows that she's in the wrong. A fact that Rainbow Dash absolutely slams her over. Yeah, I just have to say it, I love Rainbow Dash in this episode. She sees right through Rarity's lies and even has the idea to crash that party with the elites by leading her friends into it. And it's a wonderful feeling to see Rarity's face just turn completely pale as she sees her friends completely humiliate her. Even Twilight's naivete comes into effect here. And through tying herself and her friends to Rarity, she finally confesses that yeah, she knows the five. And even amidst everything that happened earlier in this episode, she seems to finally have accepted that yeah, they may not necessarily be the most sophisticated friends she could ask for, but they're really dear friends to her. And this is after we saw Rainbow Dash throw a croquet mallet with her mouth, Pinkie Pie scarfing down a cake, Fluttershy's birds dropping their seeds in every pony, Applejack destroying their decorations and their flowers, and whatever Twilight's dance was. So yeah, Rarity really went all in at the end of this episode, and her reward? Well, it's a very hard sale, but I'll have to say it right here and now, and you're free to disagree with me. I think this is a good episode. It's probably the absolute least good episode we'll see in Season 2, and that's only thanks to Rainbow Dash. But I did have a lot of fun watching it, and the plot itself is at least mostly sound. The moral feels a bit incongruent though. If the moral was more about how your friends should be more important than your social status, I think it would have been a lot stronger. Especially since very many of the same friends that Rarity did meet in Canterlot would have dropped her on a hair trigger if Fancy Pets willed it. At least with the main six, she's in good company. Episode 36, Secret of My Excess. Spike begins to mature as he collects more and more things. Oh boy, another Spike episode, because the last one was just ever so riveting. But to be fair to this episode, I like it a lot more than I did All's Well That Ends Well. It's a simple story that tells us a lot about Spike, namely in how he's not really used to getting very many presents on his birthday because, well, Twilight just gives him a book, which I think is just really funny. Especially Twilight backpedaling and blushing after she hears that Spike just doesn't really like the present very much. But also, we get to see more about Spike and how he develops as a species. Namely in how he gets more stuff and it causes him to go through puberty. Though it does raise some interesting questions, like say, how did remembering his earlier generosity reverse his aging process? But I guess in that way, he's just not like other dragons. Though I think it's safe to say that this isn't the only way he can age, right? I mean, harping back to the Cutie Pox Chronicles, Spike looked a lot younger in that episode when he was first hatched. So he must still be able to age, it's just that he must age, well, more slowly naturally. There were also some other fun moments, like say when Spike was going to the doctors and the vet, stealing Applejack's apples and her leaves. And who could forget about that King Kong scene at the end of the episode? All around, this episode was really fun to watch. And the ending is a little cheesy, but I thought it was sweet enough. Though I do wish that Spike was less of a simp. At least here it actually served to make the plot move forward. And it was nice of Rarity to just make him stop talking about how he has a crush on her because, yeah, we already get it. No excessive expose here, this was a good episode, and easily the best Spike episode we've gotten so far. Episode 37, Hearth Swarming Eve. The main six performing a play explaining how Equestria came to be. This episode is almost primarily the play, so there really isn't much to talk about here. So let's start with that. The play itself I thought was okay, though mostly unremarkable. I thought Pinkie Pie was fun, but she was really the only standout in this entire episode. Yes, I said episode, not the play. You know, if the rest of the main six put as much into their performance as Pinkie Pie did, this would easily be a good episode. As is though, this episode doesn't even reach okay, and let me explain why. So, near the beginning of the episode before the play actually starts, the main six of course have their own characteristics. Rainbow Dash wants to be the standout star, Fluttershy has her stage fright, it's like the usual stuff. But in the actual play when they're performing, they act almost no different from how they normally would act. And so, there really isn't much left to the imagination. At least Pinkie Pie was fun to watch because, well, she's Pinkie Pie. I was actually really expecting Fluttershy to be a lot more timid and outwardly timid at that. And Rainbow Dash, I expected her to be on screen more, like trying to force her way onto the screen. You know, have some fun with their personalities, really make them stand out like this was a play that only they could really act. As is, this play feels like it plays very safe and very by the books, with the only exception being Pinkie Pie. And that on its own wouldn't really be that bad if they didn't have the setup which made me think that they were gonna actually try something like that. Heck, all it really does is make the episode worse. Like, I thought Rainbow Dash learned not to try and brag all the time after the mysterious Mare duel. But now she's back in the mentality of where she's the only pony that really matters for this play. As for Fluttershy, there felt like there were some moments where it felt like she was playing behind and we needed her to be carried through by Rainbow Dash. But those scenes are still very light, and Fluttershy otherwise connects herself just fine. Which is strange because, well, speaking from personal experience, I may not be Fluttershy, but when, say, I had to sing for my grandparents' 50th anniversary, my voice actually stopped working and I couldn't get the words out. Why is that? I was suffering from stage fright. I'm surprised we didn't get any moments like that from Fluttershy in this episode. I mean, I kinda got the impression that Rarity was acting her part only in a way that she could, but it didn't really add to this episode's flavor in any way to me. And the play itself? I thought it was mostly fine. There were some continuity issues I had, but they really were not significant enough to lower my rating for this episode. Like, that should matter anyway. Though I wonder, why do they have a flag depicting Celestia and Luna, or at least two alicorns, when this story was supposed to be before Celestia's time? Was it just too much effort to make a new flag with Earth ponies, unicorns, and Pegasi on it? It just seems like a very strange design choice. Yeah, the play itself was okay, but that's kind of the problem. And everything surrounding the play unfortunately drops this episode from being okay to a nightmare episode. I expect this rating to be very controversial, so if you have a disagreement with this, well, by all means. Though to this episode's credit, I have no strong feelings towards it, it's just lukewarm. Not necessarily terrible, but just really weak. Episode 38, Family Appreciation Day. Diamond Tiara makes Apple Bloom embarrassed over Granny Smith. This is an interesting one, because just like Call of the Cutie, this episode focuses on Apple Bloom, who's not really a main character, but also her dealing with embarrassment over Granny Smith, which is actually a pretty interesting plot. Before I talk about what I liked about this episode, let me just talk about the one thing I didn't like first. Now, some reviewers like to say that if you hit an episode because of Diamond Tiara, then she wins. I don't agree with that. After all, Diamond Tiara is absolutely necessary for this plot to even function. It's not about the tools that are used, it's how they're used. And honestly, I thought Diamond Tiara was used pretty dang well here. Her being a bully not only helps move the plot along, but it also gives the stakes a lot more value. It's only thanks to her that Granny Smith even has a chance to come on stage. And she would have given the moral about appreciating your family even if they can act a bit weird a lot more value too. No, my problem here is with Apple Bloom. Now, I get it, she's only a child, and naturally speaking, she's not going to think things very thoroughly. But that's the thing. She's not an only child either. She has both Applejack and Big Macintosh. I think this episode would have worked a lot better if either one of those two were to sit her down and help her correct her mindset. We already know how tight Apple Bloom and Applejack are, and barring that, this could have also been a great chance for Big Macintosh to get some extra character development. Not to mention, you could have taught a moral about not giving a bully too much power. A moral that I thought that Apple Bloom desperately needed to learn. As is, when she goes to defend Granny Smith after Diamond Tiara insults her, it feels phony. It's not like she accepted that Granny Smith could have embarrassed her, but she still loves her all the same. She only develops this bravado because she has the high ground. And that is my biggest criticism of this episode. That aside, this is a good episode. The antics surrounding Granny Smith are a lot of fun to watch, and it's really cool to also see the backstory as far as how Ponyville was even founded, because it also goes very far in justifying Granny Smith's actions throughout the episode. It's also foreshadowed by Applejack that she does have some very interesting stories to share too, so it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina when Granny Smith completely wows Apple Bloom's classroom. The antics surrounding the CMC are also really fun to watch, especially when they try to rush the harvest but it doesn't really work out. But also the Zap Apples themselves, the animation, it is superb. It's really cool seeing the Zap Apples come into being, as well as just seeing how they manage to mature. And of course, I have to talk about the ending too, and seeing Diamond Tiara get her just desserts for being a bully. Which also hints that Filthy Rich is actually a pretty reasonable pony. So yeah, there's one thing about this episode I don't like, but there is a lot that I like about this episode. And overall, I do think it overall bounces out to be for the better. Episode 39, Baby Cakes. Pinkie Pie watches the cakes falls and learns it's not all fun and games. Man, oh man. If there was ever an episode to give me so many questions that I desperately needed answered, it would be this one. For starters, two Earth ponies have both a daughter unicorn and a son Pegasus, and the way Mr. K tries to explain it is extremely sketchy. I can kinda buy that they do have the trace of being other pony types, DNA kinda just does work like that, but the way his eyes are shifting back and forth like he's trying to hide some kind of underlying guilt, it gives a very strong vibe that his wife Cupcake has been seeing other stallions, and may or may not be an adulterer. Unfortunate implications aside though, there are lots, and I mean lots more problems with this episode. For starters, it's not funny. Like, it's bizarrely unfunny, in fact. The entire conflict is just based around the fact that Pinkie Pie cannot take care of kids. That's the conflict, and it's also the only joke in the entire episode. It wears on you extremely fast. And throughout the episode, it never feels like Pinkie Pie really learns how to take care of kids. She learns it's a lot of work, but she never really learns how to do it. Which on its own is bad enough, but it's even worse when you consider the fact that Twilight made herself available after she finished what she had to do. And Pinkie Pie kicks her out on the suggestion that she can't handle it herself. Even though A, we the audience know that she can't do it, and B, Twilight has been raising Spike for years. She's not a perfect guardian, but she's been doing a pretty good job to see him still being healthy all this time. Imagine if Twilight saved a slight little comment for later in the episode after she helped Pinkie Pie at least get an idea of what to do. And maybe even later on apologizing to Twilight for getting ahead of herself. As is, this episode not only makes Pinkie Pie incompetent, but also makes her a complete jerk. And this alone would be plenty of justification to give this episode a nightmare episode. But still, this episode continues to get even worse and worse as it goes on. Later on, this episode actually parodies the movie Trainspotting, and admittedly, I actually really like this scene, because Pinkie Pie starts to really feel the pressure of not being able to babysit these two foals. But there is a massive problem here. Namely that 1-month-old fillies are able to match, if even exceed the capabilities of older ponies. Pound is able to fly, something we haven't even seen from Scootaloo yet. That on its own is already extremely strange because, well, he's a literal freaking baby, but let's see try to justify that. After all, we learn later in the series that Scootaloo is actually disabled, so of course she can't fly. Well, Fluttershy can fly, but she's also a notoriously weak flyer, which we've seen in the Kingdom Hearts Chronicles. And she struggles to support the weight of Twilight in Friendship is Magic Part 2. Yeah, since then we've had Made the Best Pet win a Secret of My Excess, but here's the problem. Fluttershy is an adult. Pound Cake is a freaking baby! He shouldn't even be able to support himself, let alone Pinkie Pie. And then there's Pumpkin Cake. Now, both Twilight and Rarity do explain, I'll give them credit for that baby unicorns do have magic surges that come and go. But here's the problem, none of the magic that Pumpkin Cake used in this episode implies a magic surge. She's demonstrated to be very in control of her magic. And earlier in the episode, she and Pound Cake are demonstrated to be relatively intelligent. So yeah, they're very clearly aware of what they're doing. And on top of that, Pumpkin Cake has been able to use magic that Twilight's been struggling to use for years. In fact, jumping ahead a bit, she's using spells we haven't seen up until Season 5 Starlight Glimmer. Yeah, she can fly too. And she can phase through walls? I mean, to be absolutely fair, we've seen other ponies be levitated before, and we've seen plenty of evidence of ponies levitating other objects. But phasing through walls? This is literally the first time we've ever seen this demonstrated in the show. I mean, if these spells were established before this episode, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. Because at least by then we could have established that these at least exist. Or at least have there be more logic behind it than just baby want, baby gets. Even the Fairly Odd Parents did this better when they introduced Poof into the series. In that episode, Fairly Odd Baby, Poof's magic surges only really happen when he did something to trigger them, like laugh or fart. This show already established Pinkie Sense, why not having something like that for babies too? I get that the point is that babies are really hard to take care of, but how is Pinkie Pie supposed to possibly be able to handle this? After all, she's only an Earth pony, there's only so much that she can do. And her reaction where she completely breaks down crying is entirely justified. It does give way to a genuinely really heartfelt moment where she does realize, of course, how difficult it is to take care of kids. And it also does a lot to justify the actions of Pound and Pumpkin earlier in the episode. For what it's worth, while I have a lot of problems with this episode, it's not even close to my most hated. And before anyone says anything, yes, I know about Pegasi having their own magic, but here's the problem. Twilight's Kingdom happened in Season 4. This is Season 2. And Twilight and Rarity were only referring specifically to unicorn magic, not Pegasi. I am not accepting that argument. Episode 40, The Last Roundup. The main six seek out Applejack when she decides not to return after a rodeo. The plot here is that Applejack goes to participate in a rodeo in Canterlot, and she wants to use her winnings to help fund Ponyville's construction. Her friends, family, and fellow townsfolk put a lot of pressure on her to win, And when she doesn't win, well, she can't go back to Ponyville because she feels too ashamed to actually come back after promising her money and just not having any to give. It's a really good setup for an episode. However, the beginning works both for and against this episode as well. Of course, your friends and family will love you no matter what, but when it comes down to the majority of Ponyville who are not your friends and family, yeah, realistically speaking, you can't really count on all of them for emotional support. I mean, Applejack can, but in the real world, unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. But the moral itself is really strong. You really shouldn't be running away from your problems, especially when your friends and family could worry about you. And also, be more gracious in defeat. Ultimately, that is a very good moral to teach. That aside, this episode has some good moments in it too. Especially with Pinkie Pie. There are some minor gags that we get from her that are pretty nice, like when she surprised Fluttershy, or for example, where the mail pony comes by to drop off the mail from Applejack, and after Twilight takes the mail and then slams the door on him, Pinkie Pie gives him a slice of cake because it's his birthday. That's a cute touch. But beyond that, she is very entertaining, in a way that doesn't kill your story. Yeah, take notes, green isn't your color. This is how you make pinky promises, not ruin your plot. And both the visuals and audio do very heavy lifting to make Pinkie Pie absolutely terrifying. Her disembodied head over the broken pinky promise, her aggravating Applejack, her what I'm gonna coin the Pinky Kazi at rarity near the end of the episode. She's delightful here. There's just one more thing I want to talk about though, and that's with Applejack. So it's no secret to anybody, but, well, the element of honesty, Applejack is lying in this episode. I would just like to come out and say, this does not bother me at all. Why not? Well, it's because of how Applejack is lying. Instead of just telling blatant lies, she's using a lot of half-truths. Half-truths and loopholes to try and get out of actually admitting anything truthful to her friends. And the reason why she's lying is perfectly legitimate. She justifies her lying by feeling like if she didn't lie, then she'd be letting everyone down. Which, given that huge party they were throwing for Applejack before she were to go off and win anything, yeah, that would be demoralizing. It does a good job following up at the Return of Harmony Part 2 also. There, what she thought was the truth hurt her deeply, and here she feels the truth that she'd otherwise have to share with Ponyville would hurt them deeply. In short, she's lying like an honest person would, which to me is actually a pretty cool detail. And yes, I would also consider it to be in character for Applejack to lie this way. I do have one question though. When it came down to the chariot chase in the very end of the episode, how is having Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy running the chariot any faster than just running after Applejack on foot? It's a really cool climax, and it does make sense that Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash are running just because they have to fly over the train. But just like for most of the show, you have to really turn your brain off to enjoy it. But yeah, it's a good episode. And if you want me to talk about Derpy, no. Episode 41, the Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000. Yeah, try reading that 3 times fast. When the Flim Flam brothers invade Sweet Apple Acres, they challenge the Apple family's ability to provide cider for their town. I hear a lot of people say they hate this episode. And while I can see why, I honestly think this episode gets more flack than it really deserves. But before I do defend this episode, let me ask a question which is indefensible. And that's that if the Apple family is constantly running out of cider for the town, why don't they impose a limit? Like, why do they let Pinkie Pie buy so much cider just so Rainbow Dash barely doesn't get any for herself? Yeah, even on my first viewing I had that question on my mind. That aside, let me tell you about the Flim Flam brothers. I love these two. They're not only really fun villains, but they pose a very interesting question on this show. It's not about tradition versus modernism. In fact, the logic behind Granny Smith accepting that bet from the Flim Flam brothers has less to do with the Apple family, and much more to do with their customers. As is, the Apple family owes a monopoly. They could have declined the bet, but if they did, Rainbow Dash and the vast majority of ponies would have a lot to lose with just how much cider is bought before lots of them even get a chance to buy any for themselves. It's established very early in this episode that the fact that the apples can't provide enough cider causes a lot of discontent amongst their customers. And denying your competitors is also denying your consumers options. So yeah, if you ask me, Granny Smith has a lot more than their pride on the line. And they can't cooperate because if they did, they would not be able to afford their own farm anymore. When you really think about it, they had no choice. And if the Apple family actually wins this competition, they will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're the only ones fit to actually sell cider. It's actually pretty genius. It also helps that Flim and Flam are both very fun villains to watch, and their song is also insanely catchy too. The competition at the end is also really fun to watch, and it shows the main 6 all at their best. You gotta admit, they work really well as a team. And it being their teamwork that forces the Flim Flam brothers to sacrifice quality for quantity really hits hard to drive that nail in. You can't beat the integrity Applejack was preaching in the beginning of the episode. I do think it's a bit suspect though that they ended up giving the ponies a lot of really bad cider despite the fact that they had at least some good barrels. But think about it. If the bad Cider was on top, that's naturally the one they're gonna get first. So yeah, in trying to scam the apples, they ended up scamming themselves. And ladies and gents, it is just such a fitting way to lose. Yes, I know this episode isn't perfect. After all, Rainbow Dash isn't treated the best here. Yes, they try to justify some of the torture that Rainbow Dash experiences, but it doesn't really work when A, Pinkie Pie is actively rubbing it in her face, and B, when aside from what Rainbow Dash says she would do later in the episode, she hasn't done anything really wrong. Heck, Pinkie Pie is hoarding Cider for herself when Rainbow Dash sacrificed some of her own time to get Fluttershy out of bed. Yeah, my problem here is that Rainbow Dash is actually sympathetic. In that respect, it's actually worse than feeling Pinkie keen. But it being My Little Pony, you knew they had to end it on a high note. And speaking of the end, I love Applejack's moment here. Oh dear Princess Celestia, I learned nothing! Which is a pretty funny way of saying that, yeah, there's only so many morals we can teach. There's also other issues, but there are some that I don't think are really fair to bring up. For example, we don't actually have an idea of how fast the Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000 is until the end of the episode. And that's only when the apples are competing against Flim and Flam. Prior to that, all they could have known for that moment was that they were getting ripped off. Something that in their minds was confirmed by Flim and Flam themselves. And after throwing down that deal, they ended up becoming competitors with Flim and Flam and not cooperators. Really, my only other problem that I can agree with is that the townsfolk that actually wanted to see Flim and Flam lose, apparently, they were also cheering though when they were winning the competition. Like, what did they actually think would happen when the Apple family lost? The fact this episode also takes place one episode after the last roundup also hurts us a lot more too. Because yeah, you can't really count on your town to support you. I mean, if the town's ponies were to stand up to Flim and Flam and tell them that they didn't want them there because they wanted Applejack back, then this episode would feel complete. With the story as it is now, the townsfolk look like hypocrites. So yeah, I'm gonna defend this episode still. It's not gonna be a nightmare episode, but I can't call it good either. It's unfortunately just okay. But hey, hopefully this review gave you a new perspective to look at. Episode 42, Read It and Weep. Rainbow Dash develops a love for reading. If I had to choose only one word to summarize this episode, it would be fun. The scenes involving Daring Do are of course really entertaining, and seeing that Rainbow Dash really loves reading this book is actually really endearing to see. It's also really funny how she tries to hide her love for reading from her friends too. Which is reasonable why she would. Throughout the show, no pony has been demonstrated to be as against reading as Rainbow Dash is, so yeah, she wouldn't really think it'd be right for her to be caught reading a book. But if there was a book that she enjoyed reading, I'm glad it's basically Indiana Jones but in pony form. It makes you wonder though, what the heck did Rainbow Dash do to crash so hard and land in the hospital? Considering her past accidents on the show, it must have been really bad. But yeah, as you can imagine, it's a good episode. Ultimately simple but very enjoyable. Though I do have some questions, though they're mostly nitpicks. Like, why is Pinkie Pie unnerved by seeing Rainbow Dash scarfing down her food? I thought all the time. Or even, why are Fluttershy and Applejack awake at the end of the episode despite the fact that Rainbow Dash came nowhere near them? And literally only the main six woke up from that night. It feels just a wee bit contrived and unnatural that they would be awake. Especially since Fluttershy doesn't even get any lines. I guess it feels incomplete without her, but I don't really get it. Episode 43, Hearts and Hooves Day. The CMC play matchmakers to give Charlie a very special sun pony. Oh yeah, something I can really sink my teeth into. Let's start by dropping the bombshell. This has to be one of my absolute most favorite appearances of the CMC so far in the show. It starts off cheesy but really endearing to see Charlie and Big Macintosh get paired up with this really corny romantic French crap. It really plays into the idea that these kids really have no idea what real romance is, which the previous song does a really good job at actually explaining to us. Yeah, fair reminder, these are kids we're looking at, so they don't really know that much about romance in general. And seeing Apple Bloom's brother Big Macintosh being their target is actually really funny, especially in retrospect. Like, forget feeling bad, you think that'd be extremely awkward. And rightfully so, it gets very awkward for Apple Bloom. Especially when they continue that really freaking corny music in the background, and they have all this baby talk. Yeah, under the effects of the love poison, I'll admit, I'm not the biggest fan of their dialogue, but the reactions to this dialogue are absolute gold. Seeing all these ponies just looking on awkwardly and just thinking, what the heck are these two even up to? Especially from the CMC, it's really fun to see. You also just have to really appreciate the fact that this episode doesn't demonize people that prefer to be single. Charlie and Big Macintosh are perfectly fine with being friends. And you know something? Good for them. You don't always have to find a wife to call your own. Or, well, spouse, because, you know, political correctness. And I especially appreciate it because so many other Valentine's Day themed episodes just do so much to make it look like you need a partner to be happy, but this episode actually subverts it. In fact, trying to ship these two actually makes things worse. Yeah, remember that old saying about how shipping ruins lives? They took that to the nth degree in this episode. I simply adore Apple Bloom's little doom vision where she's imagining Ponyville because Big Macintosh and Charlie can't fulfill their duties. A bunch of little dumb ponies starving to death because they have no food and no education. But on that note, yes, there are some flaws to this episode. And harping back to that little doom vision, yes, there is Applejack who is still able to buck apples just fine. And yes, previous episodes also have established that yes, the main six can help out if they need to. But be real here, when you're panicking, you can't think straight, especially when you're a kid. There's really only one flaw I can really find in this episode, and that's with Twilight. She bumps into the CMC, she has the book that talks about Hearth and Hooves Day, and when she mentions there being a love potion within it, Sweetie Belle asks her if they can borrow that book, and she has absolutely no qualms about it. Yeah, that's actually really irresponsible. You really don't think they're planning anything, Twilight. That's very naive of you, even if that is in character. But yeah, that's my only problem in this otherwise really good episode. The solution to the love potion really just can't be solved by having them go to sleep because, well, really think about it. If the two ponies that are lovers are really just so enchanted by each other that they can't fulfill their duties, and we also see what that potion does as far as their physical strength, that poison can also act as an enhancer, not only to strength but also to stamina. Ergo, they feel no need to sleep. Also, I love the ending to this episode so much. In summary, shipping ruins lives, and to get some payback on the CMC, Charlie and Big Macintosh even make the CMC think that they're still going out. After what they've been doing in this episode, yeah, very well deserved punishment. This episode was an absolute riot, and I really wish the rest of the season was as good as this. Unfortunately, from here on out though, we have a bit of a dark age. Okay, bring it on. Episode 44, A Friend Indeed. A newcomer in Ponyville doesn't want to be Pinkie Pie's friend, but she won't take no for an answer. You know what's strange? The first 6 minutes of this episode have absolutely nothing to do with the actual conflict. It starts with Pinkie Pie with the Cake Twins trying to make them laugh for some reason, and the rest of the episode has no Cake Twins at all. Up until we meet Cranky Doodle Donkey, it's just established that Pinkie Pie is really friendly. Or no, sorry, it's just that Pinkie Pie is friends with literally every pony in Ponyville, which in and of itself wouldn't be that big of a problem, but they have like a 3-minute song establishing this fact too. So for a lot of this episode, there's no story. Yes, the Smile song is great, but it feels entirely like filler. But then Pinkie Pie does meet Cranky, and this plot can actually start rolling. And it's interesting to see that there's someone that Pinkie Pie actively can't befriend. She tries very hard to win him over, but he just doesn't want to be bothered. And I actually like this, because it's actually trying to teach the moral that you can't befriend everybody, and you really shouldn't try to. This episode does a great job at giving Cranky a reason not to be Pinkie's friend, but again, she just won't take no for an answer. Unfortunately, they actually did a little too well with this. It starts off feeling obsessive but strangely endearing because, well, she is still being Pinkie Pie, but it doesn't take long for it to feel like harassment. Especially near the end of the episode where Cranky is actively trying to avoid Pinkie Pie by any means necessary. To be fair to Pinkie Pie, she does try to do some nice things for him, what with the new toupee and the spa treatment, but what Pinkie Pie really needed was some advice. Honestly, this feels like an episode where Twilight was underutilized. As an introvert, especially before season 1, she would likely know the best course of action going forward. Maybe suggest getting to know him. He just moved into Ponyville, why not help him unpack? And while unpacking, make some small talk. Learn more about his backstory. As is, it feels like Pinkie Pie is trying too hard and she only wants to be his friend because of her own selfish desires. Because she feels entitled to have everyone be her friend. And that wouldn't be a problem if the moral was about how you can't befriend everybody. Which this episode leads you to think it actually is going to be the moral of, because that's what Twilight outright says before Pinkie Pie wanders off. But no, the moral is apparently that some friends are extroverted and others are introverted. Which quite frankly feels like a complete non sequitur to the actual story that was told. It's a nightmare episode! Yeah, this episode is structured very poorly. Establishing just how friendly Pinkie Pie is could have easily been done in the first 2 minutes, and she could have been introduced to Cranky, get to know his name, and then think she's never seen him before, I want to befriend him now. The song itself would have actually been better saved for the end of the episode as a last hurrah. And Pinkie Pie could have still learned that she can't befriend everybody and she shouldn't try to. Because in trying to, she was making Cranky's life miserable. After reuniting him with Matilda, just have her feel really sorry and promise never to bother him ever again. But Cranky stops her, knowing of course how much effort she must have went through to try and make him happy, and only then admit to Pinkie that he does consider her a friend. and then let the song actually play out. I think that would have actually worked a lot better as far as structure. I don't know how much more I'd add because, well, this still has to be 22 minutes long, but Pinkie Pie is only one main character out of 6. It can't be that hard. Episode 45. Putting your hoof down. Fluttershy becomes tired of being a doormat, so she seeks help to assert herself. This is an important episode because it will radically change the direction of Fluttershy's character going forward. She will still be timid, but she'll hopefully be less, well, I guess you can say wimpy. So already it's a great concept. In execution though, there's actually a lot that this episode does right, but there's also some critical areas where it goes very, very wrong. As a tiny reminder of the mysterious Mare duel, sometimes you do have to exaggerate a character's flaws to write a story, especially in this show where you're trying to teach morals to kids. That being said, there is also such a thing as taking it too far. Angel kicking the ball into the air on Fluttershy's head was enough to get the point across that she's not asserting herself. We didn't need to see him slap Fluttershy in the face and then shove the book in her face at that too. Especially when later on, Fluttershy is actually thrown out of her own cottage by Angel. It makes Angel look especially bad unlike his appearance in maybe, say, A Bird in the Hoof. Yeah, before you get the idea that Angel was just being bratty, but now it's actually abusive. The scene in the market is also mostly fine. Yes, it is jarring to see so many jerk ponies after a friend indeed, but it'd be extremely unrealistic to assume that every pony is nice. However, I do have problems with both Pinkie Pie and Rarity in this episode. Yes, they are only trying to help, but their ways of helping don't feel like they're being assertive. Especially not Rarity, who's basically just using her looks to charm some kind of nerd stereotype pony into giving up his asparagus for her. That's not being assertive. That's being a courtesan. Why is he designed like that? Why couldn't he just be any run-of-the-mill stallion? I thought that for the sake of demonstration, you should have your student do something easier and you do the hard part. I mean, her wits worked in a dog and pony show because she was kidnapped. She was defending herself. This is actually taking advantage of others. Meanwhile, Pinkie Pie, I guess, just kind of forgot that there's such a thing as inflation. People do have their own bills to pay, sometimes you do have to raise those prices too. It's a nice tribute to the Looney Tunes, but it's not really funny in my opinion. In fact, thinking about it, wouldn't Rainbow Dash be better to learn how to assert yourself from? I can't be the only person who wondered that, right? Though to his credit, Iron Will is fun to watch, and his assertiveness training actually does help here. Though inversely, seeing how every character has to take any chance they have to bully Fluttershy isn't fun to watch. Not when she can't defend herself. However, after Fluttershy does become more assertive, the episode does in fact get a little bit better. She tries to talk at first, but when people aren't listening to her, then she gets physical. Yes, you could say it's weird that she would buck some ponies that were blocking her path because she can fly over them. And I will admit, it would have been better for that scene to have been saved later if, say, they were trying to show Fluttershy toning it down a little. Because yeah, of all pony types, it's weird that a Pegasus would decide not to fly over. But I saw it as this show's way of basically saying that Fluttershy is not trying to let people control her. She wants to be listened to, and at this moment, she wants to take any chance she can to demonstrate her own assertiveness training. Not to mention, she is a weak flyer. And the line cut really needs no explanation either. Though when she jumps to the front of the line, I find that weird, because they were already there in front of her to begin with. And yeah, it doesn't take for much longer until she goes complete and utter psycho. To the point where Pinkie Pie and Rarity had to try talking her down. And in retaliation, Fluttershy basically mocks Pinkie Pie and Rarity's reasons for living. If you were to ask me if I hated Fluttershy from this point forward because of what she said, I would say no. Fluttershy suffered a lot earlier in this episode, and so she clearly does not want to lose what she's been building up this whole time. And as Rarity does bring up later in the episode, we all say things we later on regret. If you had to really be afraid of losing your friends over having a single feud, are they really even friends anymore? And as far as what she actually is saying, well, Fluttershy hates surprises and she hates being startled. There are lots of episodes to corroborate this. And as far as Rarity, need to remind you about green isn't your color. That being said, I hate the way that Pinkie Pie and Rarity reacted to that comment. If they had a more shocked expression and were like, did she really mean that? And Fluttershy then realized what she had just said and she felt extremely guilty over that, that would have worked out so much better than having Pinkie Pie and Rarity literally run away crying. Generally speaking, you don't cry unless either you're feeling extreme joy or you feel absolutely devastated. Especially the way they did. Yes, it is implied that a lot of time has passed since they were told that, and Fluttershy chose to lock her away in her own cottage. The sky is dark, Fluttershy's cottage is barricaded, but inside her cottage, she's only now being tied up? So it couldn't have been longer than a day, right? Anyway, the ending is where everything falls apart for me. The start was bad, the middle was okay, but I really don't like the ending. Let me explain. Iron Will is coming to Fluttershy's cottage to collect his payment, which for all intents and purposes, he kinda deserves. Yes, some of his advice wasn't necessarily great, but it did kickstart improving Fluttershy's life. And yet the episode paints him as if he's the biggest problem with it. Yes, some of his advice was damaging, but it was entirely Fluttershy's fault for abusing it the way she did. And so not only does Fluttershy rip Iron Will off, she gets absolutely no punishment for anything. Never mind her treatment in the beginning of this episode. She physically attacks other ponies, verbally assaults her own friends, potentially traumatized Pinkie Pie, and the most that happened to her is that she feels a little guilty, going from 100 to 0 in the blink of an eye. All the while, we the audience have no idea how Fluttershy actually managed to do it. Yeah, now she's more assertive, but how is she more assertive? What, was someone trying to make love to her while she was tied up in her chair and she just had to keep saying no, 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 don't do it? It all happens completely off screen, and we have absolutely no idea how she managed to improve herself. Honestly, I have no idea what else to say, except, wow, this episode actually had something going for a bit. But pinning all the blame on Iron Will, with Fluttershy having absolutely no accountability for what she actually did, it muddies and confuses the moral. However, I would feel very guilty calling this episode a nightmare episode, because at the end of the day, Fluttershy does learn to stand her ground, and the moral itself is very good. Don't confuse being a bully for being assertive. After all, I really don't want to hate this episode either. I won't call it good, but I will call it okay. Truth be told, I have a lot of respect for putting your hoof down. And unfortunately, time constraints are a thing. And for what it's worth, this episode is mostly very solid too. Even if it was a nightmare episode, I don't hate this episode. Not like it's a guilty pleasure, but I just don't think it's that bad. But on the note of time, episode 46, It's About Time. Twilight freaks out over the future when she's warned by her future self. I'll be honest, I found this episode really forgettable. The plot here revolves around future Twilight warning past Twilight about a disaster that never actually comes true. And past Twilight worries fervently trying to stop whatever is actually going to happen, but doesn't know what will happen. And so she basically takes any precautions possible trying to prevent anything from happening, and finding then that none of it actually worked. It's amusing enough, and there's some pretty fun jokes in there too. I especially love the bit with Cerberus, and it does have a good moral, take problems one day at a time and stop worrying about every little thing, but I don't have any real strong feelings for this episode either. I'll be generous in calling it a good episode, but it could very easily be okay too. I can't be the only person who wanted to see Twilight shave her whole mane off just to make sure that she can prevent the future. Also, the ending bugs me. I get why it's necessary because, well, it's a time loop, but I have to wonder what the very first Twilight did to end up in this situation. Obviously, this episode would not delve into that, but it leaves me disappointed. Episode 47, Dragon Quest! Spike ventures on a quest of self-discovery after being teased for not acting like other dragons. I hate this episode. I really do. But to be fair, let me explain to you why I hate this episode so much. First of all, it suffers a very similar problem to Owlswell that ends well. Actually, that's a lie. Dragon Quest suffers from multiple problems that Owlswell the Ensel has. Let's start with the fact that Twilight by now should have learned to be more sensitive, but here, all of Twilight's friends rib on Spike for not acting like other dragons. And at no point does Twilight defend Spike for any of this. It got so bad that Spike was suffering through an existential crisis that night, and not a single person even considers that they could be in the wrong for what they did to Spike at the beginning. And don't act like he's being melodramatic here, Spike's a literal freaking baby! This is not the kind of stuff he should be worrying about! It's really saying something when the best treated character in this episode doesn't even appear after the theme song. As a matter of fact, Fluttershy was right not to be bothered with this dragon migration. It was one thing when Rainbow Dash was laughing at Spike for wearing an apron and doing something feminine, but she didn't have to call Spike lame. That's just being a jerk. Also, Rarity really needed to tone down the motherly baby talk. But again, I largely blame Twilight here because she's his guardian, instead of egging it on and then having the gall to get upset over Spike because he's suffering this way. And when Spike is questioning whether or not he really acts like other dragons, Pinkie Pie and Applejack don't help either. Oh, not even close, but why would you want to? Hello? That's like asking a tomboy, like Rainbow Dash, why she doesn't act like other girls. And that's putting it mildly. For a more one-to-one comparison, this can also be said as far as why you don't act like others of your race. But oh, I'm just getting started. Now, I will give Twilight credit for this. She does spend all night trying to help Spike figure out more information as far as what he actually is. And I can believe that yes, the Ponyville library doesn't have any books about dragons. However, what I don't believe is the idea that Twilight doesn't think to ask either Princess Celestia, the pony overseeing her freaking entrance exam, that involves Spike's dragon egg, or Sakura, who in a past episode we saw actually does know a lot about dragons. You likely could have saved Spike a lot of trouble hiking through the dragon migration and getting physically abused. And the dragons, oh the dragons. Normally I would encourage world building, but not like this. Literally all we learn about the dragons is that they act like a bunch of frat boys. And I guess the adult dragons are perfectly fine seeing a baby get slung into a wall. So not only are the teenage dragons just purely stereotypes, but the adult dragons are negligent. But yeah, the dragons, they all act the same. There is no individuality amongst any of them. The only one I even know the name of is Garble. And that's just because he talks the most. And I guess we're supposed to hate the dragons because they act the way that the ponies don't. I mean, Rarity even calls the dragons awful, so I guess that is what the writer was going for. But do you really think that Rarity deserves to say that after what she did to Spike earlier in the show? No. So how do we elevate these ponies that basically bullied Spike into having this conflict to begin with? Oh, I know. Let's take these frat boy stereotype dragons and make them baby murdering sociopaths. I'm not kidding you. Later in the episode, they take Spike to go on a raid for some phoenix eggs. And when Spike actually manages to snag one for himself, they tell him to smash it. Really now, this is how you want to portray Spike's species. Yeah, Spike stands up to the dragons, but the problem here is that you have to sink the dragons to the absolute lowest point possible just to make the ponies look better. It's not like the dragons have an in-universe reason for hating phoenixes either. They just do it for fun. And no, a bird of the hoof doesn't count. That was one phoenix with a troll caretaker. Heck, Spike isn't even free from blame here. He knew what he was doing was wrong and he still threw a rock at the phoenixes. Because of this, one of the hatchlings he had to adopt because he basically had to be abandoned by his own family. Now, it'd be one thing if Spike just did not know what to do but decided he didn't want to do anything wrong. But then Garble threw the rock at the phoenixes, ran away, Spike was not really able to think fast enough to get out of the way either. And then he was chased, but no, he's part of the problem here. And that's the biggest problem with this episode. It tries to teach that what you are isn't who you are, but the problem is that Spike's entire species is demonized to teach this moral. And again, is Spike really better off with the ponies that clearly don't respect him as a dragon? All because, for lack of a better phrase, he acts like they do? Now, I hear an interesting theory. The ponies basically represent the show My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Spike represents the bronies. And the dragons represent detractors. Namely in the sense that the detractors make fun of the bronies for acting in a way that they consider weird. Or in this show's case, feminine. Well, that doesn't work when the freaking show itself is mocking its own fanbase for being feminine. It would be textbook hypocrisy. This episode could have worked if Twilight had just stuck up for Spike, and not against the dragons at the end of the episode. Or if you made the dragons' motivations feel more realistic as to why they act the way they do. There's actually a lot of similarities between this episode and the Prodigal Son parable. Spike had it all. Good friends, good family, a loving home, but then decides to venture off for what he sees as greener pastures. He slowly but surely makes his way in this new world he finds himself in, until he's lost everything, and then he pines for what he had before. And returning home, he gains a newfound appreciation for what he did have. And while you understand why Spike chose to leave when he did, you also see that the people that he left behind only wanted to protect him. But I've said enough why it doesn't really work here. I said this before that I actually really hate this episode, but I also have to say this. This is the first episode of the show that made me feel actively numb after watching it. It's the absolute most glaring example of a nightmare episode. It's such a shame that I like Spike so much as a character, but he has so many bad episodes to his name. The poor kid really deserves better. Hopefully season 3 does him justice. On the upside though, I now know for a fact that Fluttershy is my favorite member of the main 6, both for this episode and for the one that comes after it. Episode 48, Hurricane Fluttershy. Fluttershy battles to overcome her anxiety to perform a civic duty for her town. I have nothing but adoration for this episode. I love Suited for Success, I respect putting your hoof down, but I adore Hurricane Fluttershy. It may not be one of the funniest episodes of the show, but it is absolutely one of the most emotional episodes. The struggle that Fluttershy is experiencing in this entire episode feels so real. In a way I must add is leagues above Sonic Rainboom, and the reason for that is because it's entirely internal. The idea of giving it your best when you have so many eyes prying on you is not only extremely relatable, but it's also perfectly understandable as to why she feels that way. And when you see her break down crying, it is just so emotionally charged. It makes you feel so sorry for her, but at the same time, it doesn't feel manipulative either. It feels like genuine distress. And it makes where Fluttershy does end up going big in the end of the episode feel so much more satisfying too. It's actually been set up earlier in the episode that Fluttershy can fly fast. If an animal is in danger, or really it's just for anyone else's sake, then yeah, she can go above and beyond. Yes, originally, Rainbow Dash really just wanted to see a record be smashed, but she was only able to fly fast because it was her duty. She had to. Everyone was counting on her. The fact that the hurricane was only barely able to get off the ground thanks to Fluttershy really adds to that. And it really drives home the moral that every bit counts, so don't be afraid of not being able to give it as much as everyone else can. That alone would be enough to call this a good episode, but this episode goes above and beyond. On the note of Rainbow Dash, I love how she's portrayed here. Instead of just being stern and bossy, she recognizes that Fluttershy is an opponent she has to speak a specific way towards. And though she does have the right to tell Fluttershy that she has to participate, she's not forcing it on her. Instead, she's asking questions. She wants to understand why Fluttershy feels the way she does. And more importantly, she actually wants to help. At first, it was about the record, but then she's at least accommodating for Fluttershy's feelings. And when she sees Fluttershy break down crying after that emotional breakdown, her attitude completely changes from wanting the record to be improved, from actually wanting to see Fluttershy be happy and gain some confidence in herself. It's so emotionally gripping, and it really portrays Rainbow Dash as kind of a big sister to Fluttershy. The montage that follows, where Fluttershy is trying to improve herself, is also phenomenal. Not only is Fluttershy actively trying to better herself, but when it's revealed that Fluttershy's wing power is still a measly 2.3, it also sets a very realistic expectation, namely that yes, you can work hard, but everyone does have limits, and the fact that you can't be at everyone else's level does not make your accomplishments any less significant. Something that both Twilight and Rainbow Dash acknowledge. But of course, Fluttershy feels inadequate because she still isn't putting in as much as everyone else is. And that's perfectly fair. Nobody wants to be the weakest member of a team. But nobody especially wants to feel like they contribute almost nothing to the team either. Even still, she shows up later to offer moral support, which worst case is still very sweet of her. But as it turns out, because of a flaw that was established earlier in the episode, it wasn't even that she was just appreciated anymore, she was outright needed. And seeing Fluttershy finally break free from her own inner demons and really perform what she needed to, and be hailed a freaking town hero for what she did, it's just such a feel-good moment to end the episode on. This episode got me to feel in a way that I've never felt before in years. I was brimming with pride. I adored how this episode was handled. The writer did a phenomenal job actually writing it. And after the blunder that was Dragon Quest, this was desperately needed as a pick-me-up. To no one's surprise, at this very moment, this is my favorite episode of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Episode 49, Ponyville Confidential. The CMC take up the role of journalists in an effort to get their cutie marks. Another Cutie Mark Crusader episode. But this episode is pretty unique. Instead of putting all their effort into trying a bunch of different things that obviously won't work for them, the trio chooses only one thing and they stick to it. This is good for a few reasons. One, we actually get to see this develop beyond just the superficial. They at first try these cute innocent little columns, but Diamond Tiara's not having it. As a result, instead of quitting on themselves, they elevate it to gossip and they actually get an audience. But before long, it also starts hurting people. And it's an interesting way of proposing the question of whether or not you really want your special talent to be hurting other people too. And two, because they are focusing on only this one thing, this episode as a whole feels a lot more focused. Because it forces the writer to be more creative with the topic that they chose, and by extension the CMC. This is a good setup, but good doesn't mean great. For example, it's really irresponsible of Chillerly to leave Diamond Tiara, who she should know is a bully, completely alone with all the power in the world. But for what it's worth, I found Diamond Tiara very entertaining. I love the quote about how she doesn't care about feelings, by the way. But at the same time, she has a good motivation. It's not necessarily pure or really righteous, but she just wants to entertain people, which I can't emphasize with. Whereas Corrupted, however, is that she doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. And this makes her a good antagonist. The CMC also do have a conscience in this episode. Yes, they do feel like they're hurting other ponies, but they also just really want their cutie marks, which, yeah. It's been well demonstrated that they're desperate for them. And Rarity, despite being a hypocrite, does raise a convincing point. Interestingly enough though, Twilight's the only pony that had a problem with these articles originally. Everyone else though was eating them up until it became about them. But that's just something I noticed. It's not really a criticism because, well, yes, it could be considered hypocritical, but that's just how people are. People love the gossip, but people also hate being the topic of said gossip. Speaking of gossip, it's becoming more and more clear that Twilight's really the only pony to learn anything about gossip after bridal gossip. And so when every pony shuns the CMC for what they were doing, it feels the most justified when she's shunning them too. Speaking of this ending scene, by the way, I do understand why people have a problem with how the townsfolk are reacting to it, but I don't consider that a strike against this episode. Yes, the CMC are just kids, but it doesn't really matter here. What they were doing, which they were consciously aware of, was harmful. And while the townsfolk do have a say in influencing what gets made and how much of it is made, ultimately the decision of doing what was right and doing what's profitable belongs to the Cutie Mark Crusaders. They decided their cutie marks were more important than some ponies' feelings. And as a result, they do deserve to be punished for it. It's crazy also to see that Applejack gets the pony a few words, but Big Macintosh is the one that's really angry. Actually, it's pretty cool. But yeah, the CMC definitely learned their lesson, and their apology very well reflects this. As such, I have no problem calling this a good episode. The only thing I really have a problem with, though, is the fact that Featherweight gets promoted despite the fact that he was helping Diamond Tiara make those harmful articles. And aside from that, it would just be how negligent Shirley was here too. She really should not have let stuff get as bad as it did get. But those criticisms aside, this episode was actually pretty great. Episode 50. Mystery on the Friendship Express. Pinkie Pie seeks out who sabotaged the desserts in a train whodunit. So, I have a big complaint with how many episodes that Spike has that are really bad. But ironically, I think that Pinkie Pie actually has it even worse than he does. Yeah, I don't think this episode is very good. To this episode's credit, it's actually pretty funny. The scenes where Pinkie Pie was theorizing how the competitors ate the cake's cake, they're good moments and good homages to older media. But so is Feeling Pinkie Keen, and I still failed that episode. So let's talk about my problems with this episode right now. For starters, Pinkie Pie is known for being rather silly, but she does have a legitimate reason to be worried about the cake. She fears that the cake's competition will try to jeopardize the attempts at victory here by eating the cake, or disrupting it in some way. But Pinkie Pie's friends all completely dismiss her worries about it. I kinda understand Twilight here because after It's About Time, she has to learn to be a little bit more laid back, but all 6 of them learned this lesson in Lesson 0. It wouldn't hurt to at least consider why Pinkie Pie feels this way and maybe humor her idea a little bit. I mean, yeah, half the main 6 do end up eating some of the cake, but instead of trying to convince Pinkie Pie that she has nothing to worry about, maybe Twilight and Applejack could have at least tried to humor her for a bit, but once it got late at night, they couldn't stay awake anymore because they were just too tired. After all, Applejack works on a farm, early to bed, early to rise, and Twilight without her books really isn't much for keeping yourself awake. After all, Pinkie Pie on her own isn't very bright. How she missed both Rainbow Dash and Rarity was realistic enough, but not Fluttershy. When she saw the shadow head into the engineer's room, she should have at least asked the engineer what she saw. If anything, the engineer should have been a suspect. Speaking of which, Pinkie Pie was alone all night in the train cart with the cake. And various previous episodes have also established that she has quite a sweet tooth. Logically speaking, she would be the most likely suspect. And I consider it a very large missed opportunity that Twilight does not even consider Pinkie Pie for the crime. Yes, we know she's innocent, and Twilight likely would also imagine she's innocent too because, well, she put a lot of care making sure that cake got on the train safely. But after accusing the 3 other competitors, they could have also accused Pinkie Pie of doing the crime. And unlike Pinkie Pie's friends, they'd have no idea how much care Pinkie Pie had to put on to get that cake on the train. I mean, yeah, the moral is good, don't jump to conclusions, but its delivery feels weak when some characters should have had eyebrows raised at them and they just weren't. This also could have been a much better moral safer party of one. An episode where Pinkie Pie does jump to the conclusion that her friends are avoiding her because they don't want to be her friends anymore. So yeah, I don't think this episode is good, but it's at least okay, right? Unfortunately no. Aside from humor, this episode has nothing to redeem it. And the mystery aspect doesn't really leave much to the imagination to solve for the audience's sake, aside from Rarity's eyelashes. And yeah, it is cool that you can at least solve some of the mystery ahead of time before the characters do, but that's only 33%, and that's still an F. Pinkie Pie making the cake's cake look so good also is not a justifiable motive for Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity to go behind her back. This has nothing to do with the elements either, this is about Pinkie Pie and her relationship with the cakes. If something were to happen to that cake, don't you think that she would be in really big trouble? That's just straight up not okay, and Pinkie Pie forgiving them isn't justifiable here because it's not her call. That just seems like an extremely callous decision on the writer's part. Besides, all the main 6 put so much effort in getting that cake on the train safely. Why undo all that hard work? I mean, yeah, the cake kinda wins at the end, but it's a competition where all the competitors have to enter separate from one another, right? So how do 4 different pastry chefs share one blue ribbon? You know what would be funny? If they ended up losing the competition because that huge freaking thing that they made was an abomination. Then I give this episode some points for being actually realistic in some way, shape, or form. I'm sorry, but I have to call this a Nightmare episode. I hear this episode is actually rather beloved by fans, but I don't really see the appeal. But hey, forgive me for having an opinion. Episodes 51 and 52, A Canterlot Wedding. Twilight's brother is getting married and she's suspicious of his bride. And so we reach the end of Season 2. A wild ride, but this episode right here will determine the difference between a good season and an okay season. To start, I have to say this. The start is actually pretty rocky. Twilight is shown up to be pretty vindictive to a fault here. Yes, it is weird that Shining Armor would not tell Twilight about a wedding that would impact his entire life going forward. But this is the first time we've ever even heard about Shining Armor, and Twilight never mentioned him at all in the other times that she was in Canterlot, Sweet and Elite, Mystery and the Friendship Express, or Her Swarming Eve. So in not too much time, she looks like a hypocrite. Now that I've said that, that's the only real problem I have with the first half. Everything else makes perfect sense to me. The story itself is very coherent. Twilight is suspicious of Cadance, who she believes is not acting like herself. And over time, she sees more and more signs to really confirm that she was right, that she really isn't herself. But everybody else is so wrapped up in the wedding that they don't notice, and when Twilight tries to accuse Cadance of being a terrible person, nobody takes her side. The reason this works is because both sides can be seen as in the right here. Twilight is looking very possessive, and Applejack does call her out for this. But there are plenty of telltale signs that Twilight was right ahead of time, it's just that only we and Twilight can see them. But the other side also makes perfect sense, because Cadance had the excuse of wedding nerves, which Rarity brings up too. What I'm saying is that there's a legitimate reason to believe that both parties are actually in the right for what they're thinking, and that it's critical to make Twilight's friends being oblivious make sense. It's also shown that the faux Cadance has taken quite a bit of interest in Twilight, just from her mannerisms alone. It's likely that Princess Celestia already told the faux Cadance that Twilight would be supervising everything. As such, she can act rude to all of Twilight's friends, and of course, they'd be able to brush them off because wedding nerves. And Twilight, who's already suspicious, will see every single time she does it. This slowly but surely leads to Twilight exploding out of indignance, playing exactly into the faux Cadance's advantage. And when Twilight gets banned from the wedding and everybody abandons her, you know darn well exactly why they did. Even Celestia abandons her, and this crushes Twilight. Another note, this episode is also really emotional. You can see it on Twilight's face, especially after Celestia tells Twilight that she has a lot to think about after this. She looks devastated. Altogether, it's a brilliantly told story that's woven perfectly. And heck, it even makes Twilight's hypocrisy earlier in the episode look like she really is just being unfair. And ladies and gents, that's just the first half of this episode. The second half is arguably even better. And yeah, with that being said, it's a good episode. After the faux Cadance disposes of Twilight, she tries to lead her on into accidentally murdering the real Cadance. And the only reason that she doesn't is because Chrysalis, while she can copy the real Cadance's appearance, can't copy her memories. That little greeting that Twilight did earlier in the episode for the first half actually meant something, and here it saves Cadance's life. When you're dealing with a freaking doppelganger as an enemy, that's actually a really cool touch to make sure that people can identify each other. It leads to what I consider the best song on the show so far, This Day Aria. An absolutely beautiful melody that illustrates the fact that the faux Cadance managed to fool so many ponies but Twilight, and eliminated the only real problem she had, while the real Cadance and Twilight are fervently trying to reach the wedding hall so they can stop it before it's too late. The contrast in the instrumentation is also phenomenal. The faux Cadance is so much more sinister, while the real Cadance is so much more soft. It's so cool! After this song though, we reach my only problem for this part of the episode too. No, not Chrysalis monologuing. After all, she was still all alone and was likely trying to buy time. There was still a massive force field and the changeling still had to break through. And Cadance does try to attack her, but if she did attack, well, she'd be sent back down to the dungeon. And you can't see Cadance back off afterwards too, so that's not my problem here. The lack of apologies towards Twilight also isn't a problem here. Applejack tried to apologize to her, but not only does Twilight say that she doesn't really blame them, she says that everyone is fooled. So if Twilight doesn't have a problem with it, why should I? No, my problem here is Princess Celestia. She tries to fight Chrysalis after she's done monologuing, but not only does she not have the capabilities to fight, because I guess she just sucks like that, she tells the main six to rush to get the elements of harmony, which they can't get because that box is locked behind a door that only she can open, which was explained in Return of Harmony Part 1. The changelings didn't have to be there ahead of time, though to give Chrysalis credit, she really thought of everything. And to be fair to Princess Celestia, it's also likely that she was panicking too, as you do when a wedding hall is invaded by a fake. I mean, I could complain about the fact that Twilight can also use a force field spell as shown in Ponyville Confidential, but again, they were not going to get the elements of harmony back anyway. And besides, the scene where the changelings and the main six brawl was awesome. The ending is also just really sweet, both the way in which Chrysalis is defeated, but also the ending where the ceremony and the wedding finally do happen. And that song Love is in Bloom is absolutely heavenly. The animation is also just really pretty in this episode. It's really refined, which you can see when you see like the faux Candace's magic is green when the real Candace is blue. Heck, in the beginning of the episode, you can see that Canterlot has a huge force field surrounding it, which is really cool foreshadowing when Shining Armor also reveals that he had to keep the spell up so the changelings would stay out. And don't even get me started on This Day Aria again. It's not just a good episode, it is simply superb. And an absolutely beautiful send-off to Season 2. And that is every episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 2 reviewed. I have a lot to say about this season, but first, let's look at the statistics in the pie chart. We have 14 good episodes, 4 okay episodes, and 6 nightmare episodes. Though since both two-parters were overall good, that really means there's 16 good episodes. So yeah, this season leans disproportionately towards good, to the point that if you combine both the nightmare episodes and okay episodes, they still would not be more than the good episodes in this season. As such, it is my pleasure to declare Season 2 of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic a good season. Season 2 was fantastic. I had a lot of fun watching all of these episodes, except for maybe just a few. And even then, most of the bad episodes weren't really that bad. Really, it was just A Friend Indeed and Dragon Quest that were especially terrible. The others ranged from okay, pretty bad to honestly just really weak. And one of the bad episodes is a guilty pleasure of mine. But the good episodes deserve their good episode ranking. They were absolutely great. Yes, there are some weak good episodes like Sweet and Elite and It's About Time, but overall, Season 2 is where this show starts getting really good. And I owe a large part of that to the fact that the characterization for a lot of characters got significantly better. For example, Pinkie Pie. At a time, she was the character I actually hated of the main six. But since starting Season 2, she now is just genuinely really funny instead of trying too hard to be funny. It felt natural, like she was just bouncing off the road of her own zaniness instead of just trying to be as funny as possible and failing because it's trying to be so funny. She's become so much more endearing. Even in Season 2's worst episodes featuring Pinkie Pie, it feels like she actually has a character. Another thing is just that other characters have the chance for having the spotlight on them too. After Lesson 0, or really Luna Eclipsed, Twilight stopped appearing in every episode of the show, which addressed a major problem I had with Season 1. Episodes feel more well-paced, more tight. They only involve characters that really have to exist for the story that they're telling. And when Twilight does appear, it feels so much more organic as a result of this. And that has to be a plus. One more thing I want to mention though is that this show feels a lot more emotional. There are some real standout episodes that really tug at your heartstrings and make you really feel. And that's extremely impressive, showcasing as far as what animation is capable of. The final song for this season really says it better than I ever could hope to. Love is in bloom, and the power of love cannot be understated, but I love this season. Alright, yes, this was a good season, but of course, it still had some bad episodes. So let's start off by saying the worst 5 episodes of Season 2. And if you disagree, well, the comment section is your friend. Number 5 worst is Herb Swarming Eve. I really don't have any strong feelings for this episode, I just think it's really weak. It should be thankful that because of how rigid it is, it really could not go very wrong. Number 4, Mystery on the Friendship Express. It had a very shaky foundation for its logic, and it really falls apart, making the moral it teaches significantly weaker. Yes, it's fun to watch, but the story was not handled well at all. Number 3, Baby Cakes. As fantastic as the ending was, everything leading up to it was abysmal. Ironically, this likely would have been a better episode in Season 1 because Twilight would be forced to be involved in it. Number 2, A Friend Indeed. If we had more reason to feel sorry for Pinkie Pie, like if she felt genuinely really guilty, and the ending moral was different, this episode could have been great. As is, this episode could fit right in with Bad SpongeBob, with or without the song. And number 1, Dragon Quest. The previous episodes I felt mostly indifferent or just disliked. This is the one episode of Season 2 I actively hate. In a show that's usually so good about destroying stigmatization, this episode spits in the face of that and gives us an absolutely insulting story with terrible characterization, feeling extremely inorganic in the process, evoking emotions of disgust that would only be better saved for Family Guy. This episode is the equivalent to a blunder that gets you checkmated on your opponent's very next move. It is an abomination. And nothing else in Season 2 comes even close to this level of bad. As for me the best pet win, well, it's a guilty pleasure. But if it wasn't, Her Swarming Eve wouldn't be on this list. But now, to end this on a high note, let's talk about the best episodes of Season 2. Number 5 is Sisterhooves Social. The beginning is a little uncomfortable, but the story itself makes perfect sense, and the ending is absolutely heartwarming. Number 4, Lesson 0. The first good Twilight episode we ever got, and it's also freaking hilarious. Even if it didn't improve literally every episode afterwards, except maybe Dragon Quest, this would still be a good episode on this list thanks to phenomenal characterization of Spike, and the overall lack of any significant problems. Number 3, Hearts and Hooves Day. The funniest episode of Season 2. I love how it satirizes basically every other Valentine's Day special, and I love just how hard it tears into the idea that shipping ruins lives, because it really does. Number 2, A Canterlot Wedding. A near-perfect, extremely emotional finale to Season 2, and might I say, a match made in heaven. And number 1, Hurricane Fluttershy. Just like Suited for Success, I consider this a perfect episode. Words cannot describe the innate joy I feel just thinking about this episode. Extremely relatable conflict, absolutely gripping emotional backbone, fantastic characterization both of Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash, and a beautiful ending. This episode hit highs that literally no episode before it ever was able to. Extremely fitting as the main character here is a Pegasus. It's not just my favorite episode of Season 2, it's my favorite episode of the whole show. So what did you think of Season 2 of this show? Post your opinions in the comments down below. Taking the time to also thank Ricardo for being a channel member up to now. Seriously, thank you ever so much, I really appreciate your contributions. And if you're curious about my thoughts on Season 1, well, click this video on the screen right now and feel free to check it out yourself. As for now, this is Orantula signing out. Thank you for watching.